Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach
As 2020 grinds slowly to an end, Macedonians were given an early Christmas present and something to cheer about when the Macedonian football team beat Georgia 1-0 and earned a ticket to Euro 2020, delayed by the coronavirus, which will now be played in June in Bucharest. Macedonians across the world exploded with joy after the win, and the congratulations poured in from around the world. Goran Pandev, the team captain, spoke for the entire team when he said simply and elegantly, "Our dream came true," adding that the boys deserve this, and we are still not fully aware of what we have done. Macedonians are aware, however, and both joyful and thankful for a major win and a respite from the bad news that 2020 has brought. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin calling in from Skopje, Macedonia.
Cvetin, that was quite a... Did you watch the game?
Yeah, of course. Everybody did.
Okay, yeah, I didn't, obviously. I didn't know where to watch it, or different time zone, all that fun stuff. But anyway, so it was...
understand the rules.
Yeah, well, no, actually, I played...
You know the rules,
I played soccer, as we call it here, as a lad in junior high and my first year of high school. So, can't remember the...
Were you mocked for this?
Mocked? No. And this was a very long time ago, which reveals my age, when soccer, as we call it, football, the rest of the world calls it, was just getting, really making a big splash here in the United States.
Yeah.
So I know the game, I know how to play it. What I don't understand is all of the clubs and the teams and how it all works out when you're playing against each other in Europe and around the world, all leading up to the World Cup. Is this actually, and here I'm going to show my ignorance now, is this win and the subsequent games we'll play in June, is that all a march toward the World Cup, or is that towards something else?
This is the European Cup, which is practically just as good as the World Cup, because more than half of the good teams in the World Cup are European, and we never qualified for either. It was a big point of pride that Yugoslavia, led by Darko Pančev, our previously best player, maybe tied now with Pandev, qualified for the European Cup, and we were supposed to have Darko Pančev at the European Cup. And they had several other Macedonian players like Najdovski, and but then Yugoslavia started breaking up. I think the European Football Federation imposed sanctions. This was in '90, I think, and it was kicked out of the championship, of the competition, and they had lowly Denmark in Yugoslavia's place, and Denmark won the championship. So you never heard the end of it from the football experts in Yugoslavia. We were going to win it all. Look what a weak championship it was. The team they had to replace us won the championship. So this was the closest we would get, like a few players in the Yugoslav team, notable players. This was the best we could do. And since independence, we were never even close. But this was something else, finally a proper team. Goran Pandev retired, was drawn back into the team. Quite a few young players around him. Usually we would lose on stamina, so we would play a good first half and then collapse in the second. Now the team is more prepared. They actually play proper roles in their proper clubs, like in Leeds and Napoli and around the world. So they're in good shape. They can play like the full 90 minutes. The other weak spot was we would be good in the midfield, we would create a chance, but then horrible in execution. That's no longer the case. People now, we have strikers which can, find their way around, can use a good cross. And so we were third in our group for the qualifications. The first two teams advanced. The third team gets into a separate group of the best of the rest, and we play each other. And there are a few more teams from this third placed group which can advance. So it was us, Kosovo, Georgia, and somebody played with Georgia. I'm not sure who was it.
Uh-huh.
So we played Kosovo. We beat Kosovo. Georgia beat this other team, and so out of and then we played Georgia for the win, for the place in the championship. So of the 4 third placed teams, only one would advance into the championship, and luckily it was us.
Macedonia did it. Cvetin is. I know you focus and write and talk about politics and whatnot, but perhaps if you want to, there's an opportunity for you to go in the world of sports. And since you just gave a great explanation there, at least for me and for some of our listeners, I think so. That's fantastic.
I stopped watching football long ago.
Yeah. I'm looking at this great, and Twitter, of course, exploded, and I've never seen so many tweets talking about Macedonia as long as Twitter's been around, and I'm looking at this great picture of the boys with Goran Pandev on one of their shoulders, and he's got the banner that says Macedonia that he's holding up, and fantastic, just a great day for Macedonia. And actually, this happened on a Friday, I think, right? Yeah.
Everything's a blur, honestly.
I know, yeah. And we're recording this, episode 93 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, on Sunday, November 15th, dead middle of the month already. And I think this was on Friday, and of course the celebration just continue throughout the weekend and into next week. And it's, as I said at the beginning, it's something to cheer about. This has been great for Macedonia.
But of course, Zaev managed to sabotage the celebration. No, seriously, I mean, this is really a noticeable thing. So when the team arrives, they fly into Skopje,
Sure.
And they get all the bikers descend on the airport, buses, thousands of people. Okay, now with the coronas, probably separate cars, and you put them on an open top bus. You drive them downtown. Everybody follows them. The bikers clear the way like a guard of honor at the start. Everybody lines the streets, flags, waving, shouting. This is what we did for the basketball players in 2011 when they were 4th in Europe, which was also a big deal. And for the handball Vardar team, the club, which won 2 championships in 3 years. So this is how you welcome them. This is what the triumphant gate is for at the stadium, at the square. Mm-hmm. And obviously, immediately as this happened, people started shooting, even in my genteel neighborhood, driving cars through city, honking, etc. People start gathering at the square, await for the team. Uh-huh. And then, the government, people from the pro-government media start saying, well, listen, there's fog in Skopje, we might land them in Pristina, it's safer. And you realize they don't want to do a welcoming ceremony. So they land the team in Pristina, so they lose a few hours while they put them on a bus to Skopje. And Zaev welcomes them at the border crossing, which is, you've seen Balkan border crossings. Yeah. You might as well meet them in an empty field in the dark, and gave an impromptu speech. And that was it. People were told no welcoming reception, not in the evening, not the next day. Obviously, then the players need to go back to their teams, some of them. And so completely, Zaev deliberately did not want to have a proper welcoming ceremony. A lot of people on the square were shouting "Never Nort" and other things about Zaev, which I cannot repeat on this podcast.
Yes.
So it would have been, throughout the celebration, Zaev would have to endure this chance. He didn't want this, and now they even want to find the guy who was what's it called? I guess guy who comments on the game for the Macedonian television.
Uh-huh.
Like the anchor, sports anchor, right?
Yep.
Sportscaster, I think.
Yeah.
And he went obviously into delirium. He was like, never used North Macedonia once, of course. Sent out a message to Bulgaria, said, listen to everybody. And we're only qualifying, so Bulgaria isn't, Greece isn't qualified, Serbia isn't qualified. Who else? Croatia did. But anybody around us, there is nobody from the Balkans who qualified, just us and the Croats.
Right.
So he said all of those who we gave literacy to, we enlightened them, they will have to stand, salute our flag anthem. After all these humiliations, they're going to have to acknowledge us. This was clearly aimed at Bulgaria. And there are journalists from Zaev's team and calling for this sportscaster to be fined, to be fired. So yeah, it was immediately like every each of these wins which I mentioned, there were attempts to undermine the celebration from the left, including, not least of which was Zaev kicking out the Russian businessman who was funding Vardar and who bought all the good players, drew in all the good players who gave Vardar the title. So, definitely the government is not happy with having national pride in expressed like this.
Wow. Well, I'm not sure where the government finds its pride these days, and we can pivot here to a brief discussion about the ongoing attempts by Bulgaria to deny Macedonians their identity and their language. The government, let's see, where are we on term? Let's look at a date line here. With the General Affairs Council is November 17, which is Tuesday, and walk us through that, because I think you've got a better handle on that. The General Affairs Council of the European Union, that's when they're going to talk about opening up starting the accession talks with both Macedonia and Albania, correct?
Yeah, they have to adopt some document called a negotiating framework for Macedonia and Albania, and Bulgaria is blocking this. So if they can't adopt this, then they have to, after they adopt this, they have to hold what they call an intra-governmental conference, which is actually opening of the accession talks. Although just for us, it's likely they invent a few in-between steps, as they usually do, given the opposition. So the thing is that if Bulgaria stops this first thing, then Bulgarians said we need a solution by Friday. Zaev said we'll have one by Tuesday next week, as you said, and today Zaev said we'll probably not have a solution.
Probably not have. Okay.
Yeah, probably. They will probably. I need to prepare my people that they will probably block us. He drove to Sofia earlier this week for like 6, 7, 8 hours of discussions with Borisov. Did nothing. No solution. Then they had like a online conference. The foreign ministers, again nothing, and finally now we have probably the best, and I actually love this. I have to hand it to Bulgaria. This is now a beautiful turn of events on their part. So they want, generally they want that Macedonia declares that, Macedonians as a nation derived from Bulgarians, the language comes from the Bulgarian, blah, blah, blah. But it's not enough that we agree to this. This now needs to be taught in schools. This is the next demand. So they say, from what was agreed so far, there has been very little public impact. It's as if it didn't happen, they say. So you need to have this on television somehow, into people's minds, drilled into them, into schools. And, the left was, generally accepting all of this. So now Bulgaria says, so part of the stories on the Bulgarian side is that Yugoslav dictator Tito invented the Macedonians out of, from the Bulgarians.
And this is not Tito Petkovsky.
No, Josip Broz Tito, the communist marshal of Yugoslavia. And now the latest demand is that we stop honoring and celebrating Tito. So now the foreign minister says, we can't allow a country which still celebrates a communist dictator to enter the European Union. Now,
this is the Bulgarian foreign minister, Zahareva.
Yeah, and this is a very common sense request. Although, of course, in Bulgaria you also have this huge mountaintop, like a temple to communism, which looks like a spaceship crash landed there with broken windows, and the Communist Party gathers there each year and celebrates, and they're in the EU. But, they say, okay, we are going to have to put an end to the part of history books, the representation of Tito in Macedonia. We need to have him portrayed as a blood-soaked communist dictator who killed Bulgarians. So it's not only the thing where they claim that Tito invented Macedonians, but also that he was a communist dictator. And this is where our left draws the line. So they're willing to give away Goca Delchev, they're willing to give away Alexander the Great in all their negotiations, Saint Cyril and Methodius and everybody else, but
not Tito.
They don't want to give away Tito. And now we're having a beautiful moment.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We have people from the left, like journalists like Tanya Milevska, saying, okay, we're going to give up on EU accession talks. We cannot allow Bulgaria to dictate our history, and this is like fascism. Tito killed fascists. They want to get rid of Tito because they're fascists. And, all the leftists who were throwing paint balls and prophylactics filled with paint on monuments of Macedonian history, who were willing to trade away our history, and they were saying, well, why are you clinging to Alexander? He's not going to put food on the table, the memory of Alexander. We need to be practical, pragmatic. We must join the EU. There is no alternative, blah, blah, blah. And now Bulgaria says, okay, you have, in every city you have, usually it's the main square or the main street. It's still called Tito in many cities.
Sure.
Skopje has like a major high school called after Tito, and where all the communist kids. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
And it has a monument to Tito in front of the high school still, which I once defaced, but that's another story.
I hope the statute of limitations has run out on that. So.
Yeah, pretty much. And they say now, okay, we have another monument we want you to remove. And these are the people who would send. It was, I think, in our first episode we discussed how the leftists sent, repairmen, people with power tools to scrape away the star of Kutlesh from manhole covers on streets. And now Bulgaria says, okay, now we want you to remove another little thing for us. You're doing this, obviously, for other countries upon request. Well, now it's time you rename a few streets and remove one monument. And now they're going apeshit.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Wow. Well, and it's funny, just to take a step back, to see the reaction of all of the public policy pundits that we like to make fun of, the Florian Biebers of this world, and Dimitar Bechev and others like that are now rushing to defend Macedonia, although it's not really a defense of Macedonia per se. It's more of they realize that if Bulgaria were to get its way in all of this, and if the government of Macedonia were to finally completely give in and give Bulgaria everything it wanted, which of course, even if it did that, it would still not be the end, because Bulgaria would continue to ask for all the many years that Macedonia is going through the various chapters of the EU accession. The Bulgarians would just keep asking for things, and if Zaev was in power, he would keep giving into it. But my point is that the Florian Biebers and Dimitar Bechevs are horrified that perhaps that Bulgaria could get away with this, and then that would damage the European Union. So they're not defending Macedonia so much as they are trying to salvage the European Union and the enlargement process. And again, as I keep saying, I think the European Union project is dying, and that's, it's nobody's fault but the European Union's fault. And we haven't even started talking about Albania, because they've got there's just issues that I think the Netherlands has with Albania. And again, both countries are supposed to start accession talks at the same time, yada, yada, yada. Greece, of course, has its own issues with Albania, again, on the same issue of Greeks living in Albania, etc. So, the whole thing is a hot mess. But you did add a little bit of humor in there with Tito Puente. Marshal Tito. Well, we'll see what happens, I guess. So we've got, as I said, the General Affairs Council on Tuesday. You said that Zaev, as of today, Sunday the 15th of November, hasn't been able to come up with any conciliatory language for the Bulgarians.
He's downplaying expectations.
Yeah, and again, just here's a Reuters article quoting Zaharieva, the foreign minister of Bulgaria, and she says, "No one is disputing their Macedonia. No one is disputing their right to self-define their nation and call their language what they like.
Yeah.
But we cannot agree that this right will be based on hatred, history theft, and denial of Bulgaria." I mean, she's living in a bloody fantasy world, but. And again, this all goes back to the fact that Bulgaria itself has elections coming up in, I think, March. Yeah. They've had several months, many months of daily protests against the government of Boyko Borisov, and this is a way of deflecting attention, by talking about Macedonia and all these non-issues. They're creating issues out of nothing. And, where does it go from here? I don't know.
Yeah, Borisov says, like, you on the left, in the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is his opponent, you gave away the Macedonian nation, you gave them the bones of Goca Delchev, and you accepted that they're Macedonians, which was, the initial Bulgarian position when they were hoping that they will have Macedonia split away from Yugoslavia, but also they would have probably had to pay a price in giving away Pirin Macedonia and create a separate entity in the Balkans, maybe fully independent Yugoslavia made out of the parts of Macedonia taken by Serbia and Bulgaria. So this was apparently the plan, and then this Macedonia would have pushed on Greece to take the third part, the Aegean Macedonia. So it would have been a grand plan. But in the minds of the right in Bulgaria now, it amounts to treason because, for it to work, we would need to have Bulgaria actually support having Macedonian national identity, even though this future state would probably be on friendly terms with Bulgaria. Why not? So now they have a way. This is a way for Borisov to say, look at you on the left, Rumen Radov, who is the president, who is his main political opponent. Your party is too weak on this national identity issue, and if you come back in power, you would allow the Macedonians, to claim they're not Macedonians, they're not Bulgarians in the future. Zaharieva says you can say you're Macedonians, but in her mind, that term needs to be stripped of all meaning, so it means just like a very recent invention without any historical depth to the name or the language, to the nation and the language. So, she says this, and even some in Germany now gave her credit for this. So apparently Zayev's push to have Germany pressure Bulgaria failed, to the point that even Bulgarian Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, who is on the left, who is very supportive of Zayev, said that, we can't pressure an EU member state. As an EU, European Union, we need to look for the interests of the members, which was, a tremendous cold shower for the left here. And, good for Bulgaria to open this issue, if nothing, to give us some amusement. We are really long overdue a reckoning on Tito. He's really openly celebrated still to this day in Yugoslavia, in Macedonia, with very little critical thinking going into his role in being a communist dictator, the transformation of the country into a totalitarian police state. And, people now defending, he did arrest Chento, who was the Macedonian partisan leader. He did arrest a bunch of Macedonian patriots, but at least he recognized the Macedonian nation, which is more than the Bulgarians ever did. But in reality, he demanded that it be defined in purely Slavic terms, because he wanted to preserve Yugoslavia, the country of Southern Slavs. So this means giving away on anything of our history before the Slavic settlement. Looking at our history through a lens of kinship with other Slavic nations, which contributed to the dispute with Greece, because we practically willingly gave away chunks of our history and our civilizational heritage and contribution to the world. And then he created a mechanism, a a police state whose role was to prevent Albanians from seceding, Croats from seceding, and yes, Macedonians from seceding. So he would arrest people who would insist that Macedonia's interests are not served in Yugoslavia, including by not helping Macedonians in Greece. He famously betrayed them. So practically it is this police state which exists to this day. It was very lightly reformed, and we saw it in full effect in 2015 when it was these type of agents. It was the police institution which is the descendant of the Tito era, UBK,
Right.
which did the wiretapping, which runs dirty businesses, which then funded the Colored Revolution, created Zaev. So it still exists. Like the deep state in Macedonia was created in Tito's times, and its role is to prevent the secession of Macedonia and to fight Macedonian patriotism and nationalism. Now, in 2015, it meant undercutting Gruevski, undercutting the country, transforming it into now some kind of soft federal state with Albanians, giving up our history. But the only difference is that they no longer work directly for Belgrade. They now work for Washington and Brussels, and some of them for Bulgaria, for Tirana, etc. So this is the difference. But all the problems we have now in economically, politically, security-wise, ideologically, our approach to national history and identity and sovereignty, to a large degree comes from this period. So maybe their motives are not sincere, but good for the Bulgarians to finally point a finger in the right direction.
Right. Well, as we continue to watch this soap opera unfold, obviously the COVIDs, the coronas, the virus continues its spread throughout Macedonia. More than 1,300 Macedonians have now died. On a per million basis, that would be about 650, although the actual number of Macedonians in Macedonia is less than 2 million. And I know that there was talk a few months ago about a census, but I think all that's been pushed to the side by now. So you've got the ongoing crisis with Bulgaria, manufactured by Bulgaria. You've got the COVIDs, the coronas. You've got a tanked economy, due in part, obviously, largely, perhaps, to the coronavirus, but also to the ineptitude of a socialist-oriented government, which doesn't necessarily believe in the free market and capitalism. Certainly no major investments have come in under this government, and no major investments will come in under this government. You've got the issue with, as we saw in Vienna the other week with the terrorist, Islamist terrorists there that had roots to Macedonia, and of course, then the world press goes, all over that. So you've just got all these, which is why we started with the good news, something to cheer about, the football team, but all these other problems that are continuing, and we have local elections scheduled for the fall of next year in Macedonia, and there's talk about perhaps early parliamentary elections, although we just had them in July. Which I think brings us to the next issue we wanted to talk about that we had talked a little bit about offline, and that is this the coalition. I don't know if they've formally agreed to it or not between Vumro Dupamene and a couple of the smaller Albanian parties. What can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting development. So the Konrad Adenauer, the German conservative light institution, they held an event for people from, conservative leaders from across the region. And, it actually boiled down to Macedonia and the Albania, Kosovo Albania and Macedonian Albanian parties. And the big takeaway from this was that the two main Albanian opposition parties, Alliance of Albanians and Alternative, are now openly talking of coalition with VMRO, and VMRO is very openly talking about a coalition with them, even a pre-election coalition, which was a big no-no in our politics, starting with the municipal elections scheduled for next year. So they're coordinating in parliament already, and now they're talking about joint mayoral lists or at the very least, so like VMRO will support the candidate of the Albanian parties in, let's say, Tito and Gostivar with the Macedonian votes, where a Macedonian candidate can't win. The Albanian parties will support VMRO in Skopje, we're practically guaranteeing a VMRO win in Skopje. And then we'll see what we do about Kičova and Struga, where a Macedonian or an Albanian can still win. So Macedonian can still win, even though they've been artificially made Albanian majority. So they will need to decide who supports whom in these two cities. But in principle, it would be all the mixed areas, ethnically mixed municipalities in the country. VMRO would stand a much greater chance of winning against SDSM, and the two Albanian parties will stand a chance of winning against DUI. This is important because until recently Zaev was talking about having one of them, the softer one of them, join his coalition. They were both in coalition with Zaev. Early in his coalition, one of them stayed for a longer while. But now they say no. Now they say we are opposition parties. We need to bring DUI down and bring Zaev down. They're very bullish on Zaev losing support in the public and DUI. The parliament is a very well-hung parliament. So it's 62 seats for Zaev and his coalition, which includes DUI and base Albanian parties, and 58 for VMRO and these two Albanian parties, and Levica has 2 seats. Add them to this 58. So they're practically even. Zaev just needs to lose a few of his minority coalition partners and he's toast. Or at this moment, I think about 6-7 of his members of parliament have COVID.
Right, so they're out.
He can't even schedule. He can't schedule a session of parliament. So the opposition can practically block any nomination, any legislation. They allowed the budget to go through for 2020, and they said, okay, listen, we're not going to stand in the way of paying, companies, keeping them afloat at this time. But we are anything else which Zaev wants, anything that is controversial, can be stopped by the opposition at this moment. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. So Zaev was the first to have Albanian voters supporting him in 2016 through a secretive operation, very likely organized by the US Embassy, without a formal coalition, without even having many Albanian candidates. He got almost like he was the second largest contingent of Albanian votes went for SDSM only after DUI. Then in the municipal elections 2017, he had a formal coalition with DUI, which helped him a lot. In 2019, the presidential elections, he had a formal coalition with Pendarovski, and these opposition parties, they also supported Pendarovski. So they're not fully to be trusted. But as things stand, and with a very obvious German patronage of this coalition, things are now looking a little bit different. And the Germans are not helping Zaev with Bulgaria openly. So yeah, we could have both municipal and early general elections next year. We could have a new government created out of this parliament, have the opposition take over, or we could have what VMRO is actually calling for, a grand, broad coalition of experts. So let's remove all openly political candidates. Each party, all the main parties nominate experts, thinly veiled experts, and we have them run the country for a while until we figure out what to do with Bulgaria and with the coronas and the economic crisis, given that Zaev cannot even hold a session of parliament at the moment. And let's have this for a while, and then we'll figure out when it's safe to hold actual elections.
Wow, that's quite a summary there. Which again is why we started with good news about Macedonians winning, because that's about.
Well, this is also good news.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, you're right. So.
I would prefer VMRO winning the Macedonian vote, and SDSM losing the Macedonian vote, and the Albanians splitting the Albanian vote, and then VMRO picking the winner like it used to be. But maybe the first step will be to have interethnic coalitions.
Well, yes, that's true, and that's always possible at some point down the road. Those I'm take a step back here, 30,000 foot, 10,000 meter perspective. Those who think that history is one directional are always going to be surprised that it isn't. Those who always claim that the right side of history and all that nonsense. So those who think that and Zaev himself and his party are included, that they're always going to be in power, are going to be in for a surprise. It just doesn't. That's not the way life works. That's not the way history works. So I think at some point Macedonia will get back to that, assuming that the world continues, which I'm not convinced of these days, due to a variety of things that we see going on around the world, and I'm not talking just about the coronas. Okay, well, we'll see. Here we are, middle of November, entering, for much of the West, a period. We're getting close to Christmas, as celebrated by the Protestants and Protestants and Catholics, and then Orthodox Christmas in early January, New Year's in between. So here in America, we've got Thanksgiving coming up, not next week, but the week after. So we're in the middle of a transition here between administrations. Joe Biden has won, will be the next president, assuming he survives up to the inauguration. And I do find it interesting that that his transition team refers to them as the Biden-Harris administration, which is odd because you never hear that. It's always, it wasn't the Obama-Biden administration. It was just the Obama administration. It wasn't the Trump-Pence administration. It was the Trump administration. So it's interesting that it's almost like they're positioning. They keep saying Harris because they're positioning her to become president, which she likely will become president. Anyway, all that to say that there's this period of transition. We still don't know who's going to control the Senate here in the United States, although there's a better than even chance that the Republicans will pick up one of the two or both Senate seats in Georgia on January 5 in the special election. And then there's the House, and the Republicans keep gaining seats in that, which goes against all the polls. The pre-election polls that said the Democrats would pick up seats, and the Democrats have lost seats. And then you got the internal war going on within the Democrat Party that started the day after the election, that is going to continue and will intensify. So you throw all of that into the mix for the next, let's say, 2.5 months, and it's going to be an unusual time, I think, for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, this is just a sideshow, and the main event is over there in the U.S. and I mean, at least in foreign policy, it's clear that maybe you can have gridlock in domestic policy, stop some of the worst harm that the Kamala administration will inflict on the country.
Kamala.
But in foreign policy, they were sovereign in foreign policy. Even now, I mean, nothing changed. The deep state people did what they wanted anyway, even under Trump. Maybe like 10-20% less than they would have. And now under this administration, nobody's going to bat an eye if they stage a coup here, or Hillary Clinton extorts money from some country, or Hunter Biden or whatever. I mean, nobody will care about the foreign policy in the U.S. I mean, there will be probably a Republican wipeout in 2022, right? So for the congressional midterms.
No, there will be Republicans will gain seats in 2022.
Take back the House.
Yeah, in the House.
Regain the House.
Yeah, regain the House. Maybe pick up some more seats in the Senate. Don't know. But
unless they split into a Romney-Trump parties and
there's
into two factions.
I mean, you got the pundits over here already trying to guess what is President Trump going to do in 2024? Is he going to make a run for it or not? And who knows? I think it's just far too early to talk about that. Let's sort out the wreckage of this election first for both sides, and just get on with it. So.
Yeah, but here the embassy will continue to run things. I mean. That's a given.
Yeah, that's the.
There was even
Go ahead.
Even items of mundane housekeeping are now going through the embassy. There was this thing that So the Constitutional Court is supposed to make a decision on the pardons President Ivanov gave in 2016. This could be marginally important. It's important for the people who are being charged
Right.
and prosecuted illegally and unlawfully and unfairly. It's no longer a big political issue because, the deed is done. The damage is done to the country. So the court met once, they're deadlocked. Zaev is trying to put one of his worst sycophant judges into the Constitutional Court to protect this, the way that the pardons were nullified. Never mind. So the court is now under watch, and the lefty media attacked the justices. They said, oh, look, they did something horrible. They awarded themselves a lot of money. They gave themselves bonuses illegally, and this is often done. It was done once by the U.S. Embassy through media outlets to discredit, let's say, the Anti-Corruption Commission. So they would say, like, oh, look, they gave themselves a bunch of money for traveler expenses. And in fact, they were standing in the way of some decision of Zaev's persecution of the opposition. So in this case now, the court could potentially stand in the way. There is another leak of this kind, that they are greedy and blah, 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 the judges. And the judges say, well, look, yes, but we had clearance for this decision by the U.S. Embassy. So we went to them, they said, fine, do it. They practically, this is how it's interpreted. In reality, they said, there is a call from the embassy of the US and the EU that we have more money, so we'll be more independent, nobody will pressure us, blah, blah, blah. But they said, well, the embassy allowed us to give ourselves a raise, and who are you to complain now if the embassy said it's okay? So and the embassy had to issue a retraction saying, no, we never interfere in administrative affairs of the judiciary, and everybody was like, nah, you would never do that, God forbid you interfere in the judiciary here. So even keeping low profile while they wait for the clearance to celebrate Biden, and Kamala, and even as they wait for this chance, they are still getting themselves implicated. Even when laying low, the embassy gets implicated in practically, it shows that they're practically running the country.
Oh, sure. That's...
And even more under the Harris
it's
administration.
I call it the administrative state, the managerial state, the bureaucratic state. You can call it the deep state. It's all the same thing. Anyway, all right. Well, that's a full wrap, I think. Kind of a meandering discussion there at the end, but again, I want to stress that there is something to cheer about, and that is the Macedonian football win, soccer, and that'll do Macedonians good for quite some time, I think, despite all the other ills and problems that Macedonians face.
Yeah, definitely gives us quite a good buffer to sustain us through the winter, and a point of resistance and pride, and even it was even an interethnic success story. So the team has Turks, Macedonian Muslims, Albanians, Macedonians, obviously. Yeah, it's a very eclectic team. So even that was, we even had that going for us, like a good story. To contrast all this, which you mentioned, like an Islamist from Macedonia going to Vienna. Then another one of the Islamists which Zaev released from prison fled from the courthouse for a few hours. That was crazy. The other two who involved in the 2012 massacre, they have fled. They are fleeing still. This was the third one, and even that he got lost for a few hours. So yeah, there is a lot of ugliness going on, but this was something that we could look into and say that it's in other successes. So basketball, Albanians don't play much basketball, so the team was all Macedonian, a few Serbs here and there. The handball teams, they were practically foreign teams, so just a few Macedonians in them. Most of them were Croats, Russians. It's a professional team. It's not a national team, but this was, like a first proper success for a team that looks like Macedonia and competes in the main sport.
Right. and teams that haven't been invaded by Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
or other
Oh, yeah.
types of wokeness. So anyway,
They were singing together, no ignoring the anthem, nothing like that.
yeah. Good. Well, we're working on a new intro for this podcast. Maybe finally create a proper website and things like that. So that's something that's in the works that listeners can be looking forward to. I guess we have to retire Hillary Clinton now, but we'll keep the Mark Steyn part and add in some other things. And so we look forward to being creative and coming up with something new there.
Yeah. Refurbish the podcast.
All right, Cvetin. Always good talking to you.
You too, buddy. Take care.